This was another article on the definition of empathy. So in this one, researchers were investigating the meta definition of empathy. And the questions that they were gonna try to answer is, what is the meta definition of the word empathy? So for methods, for the research, had an analysis of the existing definitions of empathy that were used to distill the common high order and the low order components of the word empathy that have been defined in literature. So the word empathy was actually coined in the word 1908, but the texts that were chosen for this research were within the years 1980 up to 2019 due to the researchers seeking to synthesize and analyze, contemporary definitions. So 506 publications were chosen for the research, 11 were books, and 495 were peer-reviewed articles. For the analysis of the words, context analysis was chosen, concept was chosen, and then words or phrases related to the concept were quantified to determine presence. After this was concluded, 146 definitions of the word were found. And then so the results, it was determined that within the term, there were 9 overarching dimensions that were identified from the 146 definitions that were analyzed in the research. And these 9 dimensions are the following: empathy as a catalyst, as a function, a process, an outcome, an affective state, a cognitive state involving others and self, leading to a behavior and occurring in a specific context. So from this, the meta definition that was found was: empathy is the ability to experience affective and cognitive states of another person while maintaining a distinct self in order to understand the other. The following process used this definition is: empathy is the ability, the function to experience, process, affective, and cognitive state, which was the cognitive, of another person while maintaining a distinct self or other, in order to understand the outcome of the self, which is self or other. And due to the many different definitions that people use for empathy, it is not only important to understand that the true meaning, but when it conflicts, consulting and mediating, it is important to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what true empathy is. This clears up inevitable confusion that could occur, as well as sets up an expectation for proper communication for all parties. So a lot to digest. Again, like the word is used so many different ways, and a lot of people have like a different idea of what it is. So I thought this article did a really good job of like the different catalysts or the different like dimensions that are within it and how it is used in those terms, which kind of gives a better understanding of why people use it so differently, but how like it can all come together within those different dimensions.
Yeah, I mean, it dawns on me how important, I don't know what you call this, it's almost like a literature review, meta-analysis kind of thing.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. The article was great. It really like dove into it. And I think for like peacemakers and peace builders, it's such an important understanding to have. And I think this article like really made that clear.
Yeah, we talk about empathy so much.
Yeah, it highlights how much empathy holds, like considering all these different definitions. And I feel like for us, I mean, as practitioners, what we're trying to do is really like perspective take and try to instill empathy in others. And so as you point out, I mean, I think, yes, it'd be great if everyone's on the same page about what it is, but I mean, before we even get there, it's like you're just trying to offer like examples of how to show any portion of the vastness of empathy.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Are you guys familiar with Brene Brown's work at all?
Yes.
Oh yeah. So she has that great like there's like a little video too on like what empathy is, and I like while reading this article, like taking in emotion and like feeling connected instead of driving like a disconnect. I think like this aligns a lot with that.
I like how they distinguish, I mean, but there's both an emotional and a cognitive aspect to it.
Yeah.
But there's a maintenance of one's own identity so that you can kind of stay dissociated on some level while understanding I think they captured it really well. Was sort of 3 dimensions there.
Yeah, definitely.
I like I like kind of what Jeremy just said, but the maintaining the distinct self in order to understand the other. Jeremy, don't you have like a big word for this, you know, or the word of like, I think this isn't a weekly tip, but when you kind of go a little too far and start to mesh the identity with that of the other, maybe I'm mixing something up here, but I thought there was something related to that. And
yeah,
where empathy goes to like
projective
so far
counter identity.
Yeah.
There's this term that like psychologists use called counter projective identity, which is like what happens sometimes in therapy when you actually take on someone else's sort of emotional state and sort of take on their reality and kind of believe it. So there's no sense that you're doing it. It's just completely unconscious and you've sort of adopted it, and it can be unhealthy. So yeah, I think that empathy creates that boundary of like, I know that I still know that I'm doing this. I'm doing it strategically to be there with the person, but I'm maintaining my own identity.
Do you think that some individuals are incapable of empathy?
I do.
I'm sure it's harder. It's probably on a spectrum, and different people have different abilities to do it. I do think that it can be learned. I mean, the research says that it can be learned, and there's skills to do it better. Probably some people, you know, I mean, especially, you know, if you're going into socio or psychopathology, like they don't have really the ability to do that kind of thing, or they just don't care.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I also think that, you know, people get into states, even people that are good at empathy, when they're in defensive states, they're in like a temporary state of psychosis where they're sort of triggered or something, or emotionally escalated, and it's almost impossible, I found, to empathize or to help people feel empathy when they're defensive, because it's all about the self and defending the self, and it's very hard to drop the ego and sort of perspective take. I think that's probably some of the main point of de-escalation work, is to help people stay in their logical brain so that they can actually empathize strategically.
I wonder too how much of that, because Jeremy, you're talking about it being learned, you know, how much of that occurs in childhood development, I think would be interesting to understand, like how much of seeing that modeled in a family unit impacts down the road, you know, on top of just like your own ability, but that environment factor. But I wonder how early that starts and at what point it kind of shifts from like maybe being like too late to learn or something, but
yeah.
I know there's certain things that are like if you pass that spectrum, it's a lot harder or impossible to do later, but
right. And there's probably a threshold of sometimes it could be like, even, you know, crossing a threshold into codependence, where like they're so used to taking care of other people's emotional states because their parents were anxious or depressed or angry or something, and they constantly had to think about how to take care of their parents' emotional state, and that leads to kind of a codependent style, that taking on someone's emotions can be unhealthy on some level when it's done just constantly unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it has to develop.
I like that point that you raised, Natalie. Just I'd be interested to see too if there are studies that kind of illustrate what stems from kind of childhood experiences. I would imagine a lot. I mean,
so much of our cognitive architecture is created during childhood.
mm-hmm.